Okay, so let's talk about how we maximize profits when selling a collection. There are several steps we need to take so that we know what avenue is best for selling our personal collections. Meaning, do we want to go through a higher end auction company? Is it worth it to go that route? Do we have lower value items? Do we just want to list them ourselves on eBay or whatnot? Do we want to sell the collection to a dealer outright? These are all valid questions. This is why when people come to me, they send me an email and they go, Sean, I have this collection of X. It can be anything. Graded comic books, raw comic books, trading cards, coins, vintage toys. How do I know when I should sell? What signs am I looking for to sell into the market? And this is something that's very hard for me to answer unless if I know a lot about what you have, your current financial situation, how you acquired the collection. So this is really why we are having this discussion. So there are 5 main steps that you need to take to maximize profits. So here we go. Step 1, we first need to determine what type of collection you have and how was it acquired. Obviously, you're going to have more of an emotional attachment to a collection that you curated over a period of years or decades that you also built from the ground up, rather than a collection of items that you inherited from an aunt, an uncle, a parent, a grandfather who may have passed on. So this is very important in determining what direction we go. Obviously, if you inherited a collection as part of an estate, you have no emotional attachment to these items, it's going to be very easy to make the decision to let these items go. Now, there may be pieces of that collection that you want to hold on to just in remembrance of that individual that you were close to who did pass on. But for the most part, that's a very easy decision. Hey, I got this collection of guns or edged weapons. I really have no interest in these items. What auction house can you recommend to consign these items to? Or how best can I go about maximizing the value of these items? I just want to get rid of them. Now, when we talk about collections, collectibles that the collector took some time to put together, we then have to ask the question, are you still emotionally attached to these items? Are you mentally and emotionally ready to let them go? The biggest mistake you can make as a collector is saying to yourself, hey, I'm ready to let this collection go. Then 5 years later, you start buying those pieces back at potentially inflated prices on the open market. Because I assure you, if you listen to Reserved Investments, if you know how to build a collection, you're going to be able to have pieces in your collection that are going to appreciate over the coming years. So if you're ready to let the collection go, you sell into the market. If you're going to eventually buy those items back, potentially you're going to be paying more for them down the line. So this is something that you really have to be emotionally ready for. Another question as part of this that we also need to ask is, what is your current financial situation? Do you need the money that you would get from selling this collection? And if so, how soon? Now, honestly, this is a collectibles finance channel. So I really hope that you are never in a predicament where you have to immediately liquidate a collection because you need money. If that is you, you are doing something very, very wrong. Always remember, collectibles should be a diversification hedge. They should be a small part of your overall financial portfolio. You should have access to emergency cash and other potential low interest loans, lines of credit, even borrowing against some of the securities in your portfolio if needed before liquidating a collection. This should be a last resort if you are following the tips that I teach here at Reserved Investments. Now that we've done all that, the second step, we need to know what the approximate value of each piece of the collection is worth. This is very important. Are the items third-party graded, or can they be third-party graded? And if so, should they be third-party graded? Case in point, if you have a vintage Pokemon collection, If you have a lot of cards that are in low grade, most of those cards are most likely not going to be worth sending to PSA to be third-party graded. Same thing is true if you have a collection of coins where somebody just haphazardly collected coins and pocket change. In most cases, unless if it's a really key date coin, it's probably not going to be worth the expense to send those coins to PCGS, NGC, or CAC for third-party grading. So this is very important. Another question we have to ask as part of this second step, are the collectibles from a popular collecting category or is it a niche category? Case in point, I know a lot of people that have inherited some very strange collections over the years. Case in point, fishing lures, marbles, Native American arrowheads, these particular items, if we're going to consign them to auction, they have to be in desirable condition and also in demand. And for items like fishing lures, marbles, Native American arrowheads, you're usually going to have to go through a specialty auction house. And usually specialty auction houses are very picky in the items and collections that they choose to be allowed to be consigned to them. So this is something else that comes into play. Now, obviously, if you have mainstream collectibles like coins, currency, comic books, vintage toys, sports cards, trading cards, items of that nature, especially if they're already third-party graded, your answer is already in front of you. You obviously can consign some of those items if needed to a higher end auction house, which gets us to step 3. Is it worth consigning to a major auction house? And when I say major auction house, I'm talking about some of the big boys, Heritage Auctions, Hakes Auctions, Golden Auctions, Morphy's Auctions to a lesser extent. These auction houses typically want items that are valued at least at $500 to $1,000 or more for each individual piece. And I will tell you, as a consultant in the trade, I can verify this. These numbers are constantly rising. Always remember, guys, it takes an auctioneer the same amount of time to sell a $100 item as it does to sell a $10,000 item. And since they're getting paid on commission, they're actually getting more in the same amount of time for selling the $10,000 item. So if you notice, a lot of companies like Heritage Auctions, Hakes, Golden, Morphy's, Sotheby's, Christie's, they're consistently raising their buyers' premiums, and they're also slowly raising their lot values that they're allowing to be consigned into auction. I remember when I was starting out in the trade, if you had items valued at $500 a piece, you were considered a high-end collector. Today, there's auction companies where if you don't have items that are at least valued at $5,000 to $10,000 a piece, they don't even want to do business with you. This is where we also have to ask the question, how many individual pieces is in this collection and what is the total collection worth? Because there are some auction companies out there, and I'm not going to throw shade here, but there are some auction companies out here that will cherry pick the collection, unfortunately. They'll take all the good items and say, hey, we don't want any of this. Then you're stuck finding either another auction company that'll take the lower value items, or you're stuck selling those items yourself. So you really have to be careful in what company you choose, and you also have to understand that it takes a little bit of skill to negotiate a favorable consignment contract with these companies. Case in point, a lot of companies charge a minimum of 20 to 25% in the form of a seller's commission. Then they also charge the buyer on top of that 20 to 25%. So if you don't know what you're doing, if you just go knock on Heritage Auctions or Golden Auctions door and you say, hey, I have this collection, and they give you a contract and you just blindly sign it, potentially you can lose 50% of the value of your collection in fees. You really have to read the fine print carefully. You have to know what you are getting into. If you choose to consign with a lot of the big boys in this space. A lot of the work I do as a consultant in the antiques and collectibles trade, believe it or not, is done behind the scenes, working with individuals that have collections like this, that have reached out to some of these big boys and want my opinion on the consignment contract that they're about to negotiate or sign. This is why, if we get to this point, I would always encourage you to have backup auction companies that you're willing to work with. Case in point, there's a lot of people out there that have their heart set on working with, I want to do business only with heritage auctions or Hakes auctions or golden auctions. And I always tell them, if it's a mainstream third-party graded collectible that has a lot of value in the open market, you want to get as many hits from as many auction companies as possible, because it's going to give you leverage to negotiate. Now, the dark side of the trade, unfortunately, is that a lot of these auction companies, they know what their competition is doing. So let me use this as an example. If Heritage says to you, hey, we'll be able to do this for just a 10% seller consignment fee, just keep in mind, they're also going to charge a buyer's premium on top of that. But most other auction companies that you're going to reach out to, they know how low the competition is going to go. And this is where I have always suspected, and again, I have really no proof of this. My mentors would tell you otherwise. They claim to have proof of this. But there is a lot of speculation out there that there is collusion amongst these companies. Case in point, many years ago, there were several key lawsuits leveled against a lot of the big boys in the auction space, primarily Sotheby's and Christie's, for colluding on consignment rates for some of the top pieces of art that they were bringing to auction. This is something worth looking into, guys, because it really shines a light on the way that a lot of these companies do business. Now, I have no proof of this. I want to be very clear. This is all speculation, but it's very interesting. Like when I work with clients in this regard, it's very interesting how close some of these auction companies will be when you start negotiating a consignment contract with them behind the scenes to one another. It's almost like they know what the other guy is going to come back with. Now, I do have to give a shout out here. I have worked with Heritage with my own collections and also behind the scenes. I will say Heritage by far has been, surprisingly, one of the best auction companies I ever worked with, indirectly or directly. Because keep in mind, when people use my services, they don't tell the auction company that I'm involved on the back end. Usually I'm giving them tips on how to deal with the auction company. But I will say the majority of my success stories have really come out of heritage auctions. As a matter of fact, during the graded video game bubble, I will say this, those of you that took my advice, if you sold into the hype, Heritage was there for a while, willing to make some sweetheart deals on some of these top tier items that sold for record prices at auction. So I do give Heritage a lot of props in that regard. Remember, I'm not sponsored by anybody. I'm just saying Heritage was very good to always work with. I will state that. Some of these other companies that I mentioned, I'm not going to go into detail here. Depending on what you're consigning, depending on the value of that consignment, they can be very difficult to work with. I will state that right up front. Even myself, when I've gone to market and consigned something to auction, there have been some items that I have consigned where I have said, you know what? If I sign this contract, I can honestly get more for this item by selling it through a dealer than consigning it through this auction company. Now, I will tell you, usually these types of items, they're more niche items, vintage advertising, marbles, Native American artifacts, antiquities, items like that. Usually with graded collectibles, you can usually negotiate a good consignment contract for yourself without giving away the proverbial farm. Now, another thing I will bring up, when you consign to a major auction company, whether again, Sotheby's, Christie's, Heritage, Hakes, Golden, Morphe's, one of the benefits that you have is it mitigates risk. If you have an item worth $3,000 and you're going to sell that item on eBay. It is easy in today's environment to get taken advantage of on eBay, even if you're a top-rated seller. Now, sometimes eBay will come to your defense. They will protect you. Other times, you're stuck in no man's land. I have seen both scenarios play out with a lot of my clients. So sometimes somebody will list something for $3,000. Most times, it'll go off without a hitch, meaning the buyer is very honest. They get the item. They leave good feedback. They keep the item. Other times, though, there are those instances where you have scammers that are on eBay that know how to play the system. And sometimes it's out of eBay's control to the point where I have seen people get stung to the tune of thousands of dollars, meaning they're out that money because they chose to sell something through eBay. So it is a crapshoot at that point. Now, step 4. This is where we have to ask, is it worth selling to a dealer? Now, keep in mind, for most collectibles, most dealers will only pay anywhere from 20 to 50% of an item's overall value, unless you have high-end specimens with a lot of demand. Then there are some dealers out there that will pay close to 80% of the market price if they feel they can move the item very quickly. And this is where I have to give a shout out. There are some very, very honest dealers in both the rare coin and comic book space that are great to work with. I have heard excellent success stories from some of my clients. They were thinking of going through a high-end auction company, and some of the well-known graded comic book dealers or rare coin dealers out there made them an offer they just couldn't refuse. They paid close to 80. Some cases, I had a rare coin dealer pay close to 95% for some key proof gold coins from one of my clients, simply because he knew that he could pretty much move them in a week. He was okay making only 5% on those coins because he knew he could sell them rather quickly into the marketplace. This is why I keep telling you guys on this channel, if you collect certain higher end, established or mature collectibles, like rare coins, currency, certain firearms, certain historical artifacts, certain rare books, these items can be very liquid on the open market. There are dealers out there that will pay up if they know you have an item that is very scarce, especially if it's already third-party graded, that they can just pay like 90 to 95% of the value, and they have a buyer on the other end of the phone that they can just call and go, hey, I got this rare coin here. I paid $7,000 for it. I'll sell it to you for like $7,500. They'll make the quick $500, and both parties are very happy in that transaction. That does happen in these markets. So I don't want you to write off dealers entirely. What you do have to watch, there's a lot of what I call low-level predatory dealers in the antiques and collectibles trade, where if you have a collection, if you have something that's really valuable and you don't know the value of that item, you can get taken advantage of. This is where you really want to be cautious and you want to use nuance. You really need to understand what you have and the value of the item if you are going to sell to an independent dealer in this regard. Now, step 5. And this is where we get into the idiosyncrasies of selling these items yourself. If you have lower value items, it is usually best to sell these items yourself, depending on how much time you want to put into maximizing the value of the collection. Now, this is where we have several different options. You can, of course, sell these items on online collecting forums, Facebook Marketplace, if you want to take the risk. The other two main options right now are eBay and whatnot. Now, these are viable options, but there are differences here. And this is where we get into the important part of this video. eBay is good for having direct control over the pricing of items you want to sell. You can simply set a buy it now price with a best offer and take offers on items you are selling. Be very careful, however, using low auction starting prices for common mass-produced collectibles. I have seen this happen from time to time. It's always amazing. If you ever search eBay and you look at completed and sold listings, you will see this phenomenon. There are individuals out there that will have something like a brand new factory sealed Nintendo Amiibo or a Funko Pop or a Lego set, and they'll list it for 99 cents with an auction format listing. And they'll think in their mind they're going to get market value for that item. Well, lo and behold, you got to remember, when we're talking about common mass-produced items, it's going to be more than your listing that is going to be out there on eBay. So the auction will end and they'll get like $7 for a brand new Nintendo Amiibo or a Funko Pop, and then they'll complain that eBay is a scam because they only got $7 for this Amiibo that just has a retail price of $15.99 in the store. You have to understand, people on eBay, even people on Whatnot, they're looking for a deal. If you shoot yourself in your proverbial foot by listing something at 99 cents, of which there's tons of those items already readily available and listed on eBay as well as other platforms, you're going to get what you deserve. As 9 Inch Nails has said in their famous song, Head Like a Hole. Bow down before the one you serve, you're going to get what you deserve. Well, in this case, if you do something stupid, the market's going to slap you in the face with a stale donut. So there are certain techniques, certain selling behaviors that you have to be aware of on eBay that are either going to benefit you or slap you completely in the face. If you don't know how to navigate eBay, it's probably best you learn before you start selling a massive collection, even if they are low-value items on the platform. Now, one good thing about eBay is completely passive. Once you take a picture of the item, once you list it on eBay, you don't have to do anything else until you either get an offer on that item or until the item sells. Now, the other option that has become quite viable in the last few years, aside from eBay, is Whatnot. Now, personally, I am not a fan of Whatnot. Whatnot, to me, is more of a performance art than that of a selling platform. And I know the people at Whatnot are going to take issue with this if they see this particular video. But what I will tell you is, unless you like being in front of a camera, unless you already have a social media presence, unless you like potentially selling items at a loss, Whatnot is not for somebody like me. I'm the person that likes to be away from the camera. I do consulting work. I like to sell things behind the scenes. There are people out there, however, that are getting items at a very low cost, or they have a massive collection that appreciated in value over the years to the point where they really enjoy selling through Whatnot. The main problem I have with Whatnot is you really can't control the end auction price that you're going to get for your items. It's harder to do it on Whatnot than it is on eBay. That said, if it's for you, if you already have a presence on Whatnot, there are people that come to me, they use my services, they sell on Whatnot, and they're very successful at it. If that's something that you really enjoy, go through Whatnot. Whatnot, in most cases, is better for a large collection of smaller value items that you either inherited or you got at a very low retail cost. That's just my opinion on the platform. Now, keep in mind, there is no such thing as a free lunch, and the collectibles trade is no different here, guys. You will only get out of something that which is equal to the amount of work or monetary value you are willing to give up. This is a prime example of opportunity cost in a nutshell. When it comes to selling a collection or collectibles, unlike Wall Street, the opportunities are not always as transparent, and there are higher fees involved. If you go through an auction, meaning Hakes, Heritage, Morphe's, Golden, Sotheby's, Christie's, you are going to give up a portion of the value of that collection to mitigate the risk and have those items seen by top-tier collectors. On the other end of the spectrum, if you sell through eBay, if you sell through Whatnot, you're going to pay a smaller commission, but you're also going to have to do a lot more work. And let us not forget that if you're going to really try to list this stuff on Facebook Marketplace, on online collecting forums, you're going to deal with a lot of riffraff. You're going to deal with a lot of people that are just inquiring about the item, not really ready to buy. There's going to be a lot of time wasters in those particular formats. So again, these are the questions that you really have to ask yourself if you are going to maximize the value of your collection. And here are also the steps you need to take. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you are subscribed to this channel, I will see you in another upcoming video.